Hi, everyone. It's Rebecca Imholtz with the Mount Pleasant Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to today's The Pivot. I'm really looking forward to it. It's a very timely topic. We're going to be talking about basically mental health during COVID-19 with some experts from Modern Minds. And once again, we have John Carroll as our host for The Pivot. How are you today, John?
Doing well, Rebecca. Thank you. Good to see you as always. I hope you had a great Halloween.
I did. It was a lot of fun. We had some cute little trick-or-treaters and everyone was socially distanced and we enjoyed it very much. It was a beautiful evening to be outside.
Fantastic. Great to hear that. Well, thank you, Rebecca, as always, for getting us going, and welcome everyone to The Pivot, a weekly series of informational discussions on our local, regional, and national issues in the midst of and following the current pandemic. This event is presented exclusively by the Mount Pleasant Chamber of Commerce. My role as moderator is to introduce our guests, get the discussion started with some questions, and give people an opportunity to ask questions. Rebecca will be with us and she'll join us back again in a little bit. Thank you for taking the time with our Mount Pleasant Chamber of Commerce to join fellow members in staying informed to help you care for your team, your clients and customers, and take care of business in post-pandemic conditions. Mental health continues to be an area of increasing concern in these times of social isolation for many. On this edition of The Pivot, we'll look at those conditions, their impact on individuals, and current therapies to address mental health issues in our community. Our guests today on The Pivot are with Modern Minds. Our first guest is Dr. Marie Albano, Executive Director at Modern Minds. Dr. Albano is a founding fellow of the Academy of Cognitive Therapy and received the Outstanding Contribution to Clinical Activities Award from the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies. Dr. Albano earned her Bachelor of Science degree from Florida State University, a Master of Arts from the University of Richmond, and her doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Mississippi. Her research focuses on the study and treatment of anxiety and depression, particularly on ways to innovate and improve upon the effectiveness of cognitive behavioral therapy. Dr. Albano, welcome to The Pivot.
Thank you. I've been all around the South, so I was waiting to get to Charleston. It's wonderful to be here.
It's a great place to land, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Also joining us on this edition of The Pivot is Dr. Kevin Gray, Chief Medical Officer at Modern Minds. Dr. Gray earned his medical degree from the Medical University of South Carolina in the year 2000 and completed his residency in general psychiatry in 2004, followed by his fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry in 2005. He is board certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology in general psychiatry and child and adolescent psychiatry, a distinguished fellow of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and a fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. Dr. Gray, welcome to The Pivot.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Glad to have you both. Dr. Albano, let's start the questions with you. How does Modern Minds take a modern approach to treating anxiety and depression while using traditional therapy?
Well, that's a great question, and that's what really drew me to Modern Minds and working this with this program. When most people think about therapy, you're thinking about either going in once a week, sitting on a couch, and spilling it out to a therapist who sits there and talks to you, or perhaps you see your psychiatrist once a week, and then that moves to once every couple of months. That's the typical way therapy actually is done, weekly. And it's a therapist giving you suggestions, maybe listening, but it ends there in the sense that it's up to you then during the week to take or leave what you've talked about, and you come back the next week. We're doing something very different. We want to make maximal use of the time and the motivation that you have to engage in ways of changing your life. And based on then advances that have happened over the last 25 years in treatment of anxiety or depression through cognitive behavioral therapy and related psychotherapies plus medication, we are not just sitting with you once a week. but we are engaging what we call wellness mentors who will be like coaches working with you throughout the week. We're also using technology because it's here at our fingertips now to personalize the information and the strategies and the activities you need for you yourself during the week and interact with us during the week. So we're bringing therapy more to life and bringing more meaning to it and more activity to it, because we have a model that focuses on the whole person. You're not a diagnosis. You're not made up of just symptoms. You are an individual human who feels and feels everything. We want you to understand that and to do things, not just with your emotional and mental faculties, but also physically and socially in the world, so you could make the changes that you want to make and sustain them. I think
I am muted. Forgive me. So if I'm understanding you, all this stuff is somehow connected. It all has a role in mental health.
That's exactly right. Because, you know, where we think the therapies that really have been well developed and they are excellent, but where they sort of fall apart is we get very good outcomes in the short term with any of these therapies. But what, you know, as a therapist myself for 30 years, I can sit there week after week and say, you know, and we're doing well working together, but it'd be really great if you got out and took a walk each morning to clear your head before you start into work, or if you did some yoga, or if you connected with a book club so you meet people who are interested just like you. But then I have to, you know, I can't do that with my clients, right? It's sort of like you lead the horse to water, but it's up to them. Well, we want to go further. If people actually do engage in these strategies that they want to do, that are in line with their personal values and things that they can do in their community, then we have so much more that we can get out of the therapy in terms of changing the way that you feel and the way that you live your life. So it's integrated, mental health and wellness, physical health, it's all in there.
Thank you. Dr. Gray, talk about some things that you recommend besides therapy and medication. I think Dr. Albano has touched on that, but diet and time outdoors, what other steps can people take to enhance their mental health in these extraordinary times?
Oh, so absolutely. So I'll begin by actually saying the counter is that, you know, so psychotherapy and medication are really powerful tools, particularly for those who are really struggling with depression, anxiety, stress. One of the things we're emphasizing is both whether or not you have a diagnosis. All of us universally have a human condition in which we, when brought to a certain limit, we become overwhelmed with stress. And all of us have a tendency to engage in bad habits when we're overstressed and not thinking about the future, but thinking about the moment. As an individual, I'm prone to stress eating. If I'm stressed out about something in the moment, I'll eat. Probably not a good idea in the long term, and I regret it soon thereafter. And so part of what we're doing is both when we engage in therapy and medication management, but also when we're just advising our friends, colleagues, peers, is the idea of developing a pattern of habits that A, help you to cope in the moment, but B, when you wake up the next day, you're glad you did that. And so that's easy to say and hard to do. And so things like diet and exercise, we all know is that a lot of what we do, both in terms of our physical health and mental health, depends on our energy balance and getting the right kind of nutrition, getting enough sleep, and managing our stress adaptively. And so it's part of the challenge we find is that it's not new information that if we eat better, if we exercise more, if we sleep better, we're going to feel better generally, whether we are depressed or not, whether we have an anxiety disorder or not. So those are all good habits. Part of what we're really trying to do with Modern Minds and just in general is the idea of how to instill those positive habits in a way that is sustainable. And as Dr. Albano would really pointed out is that the gap had always been is that, okay, you'll have a therapy session where you have this plan, you go out to execute the plan, but then stress happens, life happens, and you get off kilter and you come back to the next therapy session and head down, well, I guess I didn't do that stuff. And what we're trying to do is really try to connect those dots, not in a way that is completely prescribed where every single person gets the one size fits all, but is really work with people on their life context, right? So things are complicated, both in people's individual circumstances with family, what age their kids are, what their job responsibilities are and hours are. And so working with them with a really practical plan in between, so that we don't forget these things when we jump to, okay, what's the therapy, what's the medication, but we really kind of get that foundation of diet, exercise, sleep. I could go into more detail around that, but I think for me, it's much more about understanding somebody's own situation and context, treating every client as an individual rather than a diagnosis, and really kind of working together on a plan that's not just, here's what we do for this hour of therapy, but it's much more of, here's what we're going to implement over time. And we're going to be helpful coaches in doing that, not sort of somebody nagging you for it, but helping you to roll up sleeves and figure out a way to even take steps in that healthy direction.
Thank you. And this is really the tough stuff, isn't it? Because we're talking about habits. We're talking about things that we do that we don't even have to think about. They're so ingrained. They're so part of who we consider ourselves to be that whether we like them or not, we tend to do them based on stimulus response, right?
Yes, and we live in a challenged time where some of those built-in things have changed, right? So I'm talking to you from my office at MUSC right now, and what I typically get is I engage with my colleagues and see people. I go to meetings, I do things in person. That A, involves me walking or running from place to place, depending on how tightly my meetings are scheduled. But B, you get the stimulation of the social interaction, and that's part of my mental wellness. I've had to try to adapt to doing Zoom meetings like this and try to get the best out of that, but realize I need more movement and I need more direct personal interaction, but I need to find substitutes for that. And so I think it is that it shouldn't be a secret to most people, some of the things that they do have built in that make them feel better, not just for today, but they'll wake up tomorrow and be glad they did it. But how do you get into that pattern where you're doing it and it's reinforcing itself and you develop that as something, as you say, something you don't have to think about, you just do.
And John, a lot of this from our model is being leveraged with what's called acceptance and commitment therapy approach. And essentially what that is that we're working with each individual to take really a self-assessment. We guide them through this of what matters to them in their life. What are the values that they have in terms of the way they're living and want to live? What intention did they have in going into a certain career or to having family and such? And really to take stock, are you taking care of yourself and living your values? And if not, what's gotten in the way? What's gotten off course? So how can we help you to sort of recommit to that? So again, you get more fulfillment. And also, you're not as stressed because you're living then the life you really want to lead.
If you align a plan with your values, it's your plan. If it's not aligned with it, it's somebody else's plan that they've handed you on a sheet of paper. And then you can develop some resentment because you're like, well, whether you're consciously aware of it or not, it doesn't align with your values. So a big part of acceptance and commitment therapy is really, sometimes people have to mine a little bit. I heard the word earlier today, spelunking. So you have to do a little bit of diving in there to figure out what are my values really, because you get into the grind of day-to-day life and you may have found yourself differing from where your values are. So a lot of it's really coming back to that. And the work tends to stick better if it aligns well with your values, and just awareness of it is powerful, but it also helps things to stick and help you make those long-term changes.
Wow, this is fascinating. We could talk, I'm sure, for long times about the details of this. The ownership aspect of it to me is particularly fascinating and important. What I think I hear both of you saying is that when somebody owns what they want, what they hold most dearly, then they're much more likely to move in that direction, right? When they're reminded of that on a regular basis, when it's put in front of you over and over and over again and say, here's what you said you wanted, here's what's most important to you, here's what's going to help you realize and be and do, right? That to me is fascinating. I have some other questions though. Dr. Albano, talk about the increased instances and frequency of isolation and its impact on mental health overall and among key segments of the population. Dr. Gray referenced it when he talked about how he is flexing or pivoting, as it were, with conditions, because he doesn't have to run from place to place for appointments, as one example.
Yes. Well, that's right now, that's top of mind for all of us who are doing therapy. Because, let's just think, first of all, who is at risk for being isolated right at this point since March? Who's at risk? Who are the people we want to worry about? And so when you think about, first and foremost, the elderly, especially even if they're living in communal settings, retirement centers, nursing homes, or living alone, still they have to social distance in a way that isn't something they necessarily want. So we think about the elderly, of course, individuals who have physical or mental health problems or disabilities that are restricted as it is in their ability to get around and function in the world. Those individuals, single people who are single and live alone, and single parents who have more on them, that they're stuck in the home with the kids all day because their children aren't at school, whether they are homemakers or they work outside of the house. All that changes when you're single. And then just thinking about the individuals that you know, whether from your office or friends, family members, who tend to be more reserved, more inhibited, or less, outgoing. These individuals too, all of these folks now, their lives have changed, as all of our lives has, with, like Kevin says, we're not moving around. You are not driving around town. We're not dropping into a grocery store at will. We're not seeing people passing in the hallways. And then these individuals, they may be at home and they may be forgotten by those who normally would have stopped by or seen them passing in the hall. And what happens with the more isolation that an individual experiences is the more that their thoughts can turn inward and misinterpret. Well, for instance, I have some patients that I have been seeing who, being home and alone, and they're saying, my friends don't care, nobody calls me. And I ask, did you reach out to them? Well, no, but nonetheless, when you're alone, you tend to focus inwards. And for some people, they're more at risk of focusing on what's the negative or what they think is negative. No one loves me, no one cares, this is my life. I mean, I have some elderly patients I'm working with, and elderly meaning, 80 or older. And their thought is this the rest of my life now? Sitting and not being able to see my family and such. So we have to think about these individuals and make efforts to reach out to them. It's on us. It's on us, not just as family members, maybe, or friends, or just people in the community, but those of you who are, supervisors and business owners and such. Think about your staff and who are the folks who are most at risk there. Their mental health is important in keeping that up, because then that gets them, when things open up to whatever the new normal will be, they'll be more ready to re-engage with it.
That makes sense. Dr. Gray, what would you add?
Oh gosh, I think that's a big part about helping to try to maintain connections, I think, is the biggest thing. And we live in a world where we're accustomed to, if we don't see somebody, at best we text them. So one of the things that people are getting back into the habit of is either via just a phone call, which seems like a very old-fashioned notion, or FaceTime or some kind of video interaction, so that we don't lose sight of that. One of the pointers that somebody had that I found very useful is scheduling rather than waiting for the time to come when you're going to meet with somebody, particularly somebody who may fall off the radar during your busy schedule. It's fulfilling to see people. And when we don't have that built in, we lose that. And we've had the luxury for so long, right? The reframing is like, we didn't think we had it so good, but we had it pretty good. And recognizing the luxury we had of being able to see people that we care about often, and via restricted travel, via restriction in terms of contact, is that some of that has fallen away. And if we have to think of it every time, it's less likely to happen than if we say, you know what, it looks like Tuesday evenings at 9 is a really good time for the two of us to catch up. Let's just put on a recurring schedule. Let's do it. And that then feeds that. And so some things like that of also getting into the idea of that, well, it's not this short-term thing that then we're going to go right back to normal. This is going to be an evolving thing over time. And so we can't have the illusion of, well, we're going to flip a switch and it'll be right back to normal. So we might as well build in these things that create fulfillment and connection, particularly for those for whom that there's the highest level of vulnerability because they may be at risk for COVID because of age, because of medical complications, who may not be able to have the luxury that others have of getting out and about a bit more.
Right,
If I could just add a concept, because Kevin, this just made me think of this. The other thing is for everyone to bear in mind, to be resilient through these trying times doesn't mean that we're going back to the way we were. Resiliency isn't the idea of a rubber band that snaps back after a prolonged period or even a single incident trauma like a hurricane that comes through. This is a prolonged period with the virus. So the way that you're resilient is if you engage in activities that are self-care focused, that you take care of your body, you take care of your needs, you take care of the social aspects of yourself and that, and also that you're flexible in the way you're thinking. Because flexibility of thinking, not having to control everything, not having everything to be perfect, but being flexible and rolling with stuff is important because that helps us to adapt.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Gray, talk about safety protocols that you've put in place to see patients during the pandemic. How have these steps changed your treatment approaches for mental health going forward? As an example, are virtual visits here to stay?
So obviously a very timely one and relevant to what we were just talking about. Does the rubber band go right back, or do we adapt to something a little bit different? I also think about like the pendulum swing. It swings one way, but it may pivot back just a little bit. And so the idea here is, first and foremost, in terms of safety, is that Modern Minds takes safety extremely seriously. We're in lockstep with MUSC's policy in terms of in-person visits, pre-screening, contact precautions, distancing, masking. We take it very seriously. Safety comes first. But also, we had already built into the model the availability of virtual care. It's actually really essential for that check-in with your wellness mentor. Well, the therapy sessions can be virtual as well. So if folks, either A, for safety reasons, or B, because they don't like coming downtown because of just dealing with streets and traffic, is there's the availability of virtual care. So what I don't think is going to happen is, I don't think we're going to land post-pandemic into a state where we completely give up in-person care. There's a lot of power, sort of as we suggested earlier, in direct face-to-face conversation, and therapy in that way is very powerful. But we also, I think, we're very hesitant to see, to make that jump to virtual care and relying on that. But in some ways, the silver lining here is the pandemic has really fast forwarded that delivery of care is something more palatable and necessary, such that then people become acclimated to it. It's about 10 years ago now when I started doing some telepsychiatry care with MUSC, and I was somewhat skeptical at the time, but it just took some time to get used to it, and also recognizing that particularly my younger patients didn't see any problem with it at all, and I was just like the older guy. So I was both dealing with the technology, but at the same time also saying, do we lose the power of therapy? So I'm being a bit long-winded, but I do think we landed a different place, but it's a place where we're actually more nimble than we were before. So that some people's visits or some visits for a particular person could be in person or could be virtual depending on circumstance. One thing we're serious about with Modern Minds is working and engaging with people who are busy, who may have a full-time job, family, many responsibilities, and we want to work with them in their hours and their availability, and virtual care may be an absolute necessity. Now, I'm very proud of the space that Modern Minds is in. It's a gorgeous space, very therapeutic just by physically being there. And so I think that's powerful in and of itself, but if somebody can't make it there, they can't get care. So that's why we've got this model where people can engage virtually as well.
Where is the space located, by the way?
You want to take that? So it's
40. We are at 40 Calhoun Street in the TD Bank building. So, and we have parking right across the way. If the website, and we have a slide that you'll put up at the end that has our information, but the website even has a little video on how to get to us from the parking garage.
Yep. So
Fantastic.
it's right on the corner of East Bay and Calhoun, near the aquarium. So conveniently located if you are close to downtown, but also not a heavy lift in terms of navigating if you don't live downtown. So from West Ashley, east of the Cooper, actually, I guess we are talking about Pleasant as an audience. So quick shot from the bridge and down East Bay, and then turning onto Calhoun into the parking garage. So relatively easy if you're thinking about navigating complicated streets. It's pretty easy. And I do promise it's very, very nice space.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dr. Gray. Dr. Albano, we've heard MUSC mentioned a few times. Talk about the partnership between Modern Minds and MUSC, please.
This is a wonderful partnership, I've got to say, and I've worked in medical centers for many years. The BEEMOK Family Foundation and MUSC Health has partnered in coming together to put Modern Minds together. And this enables us to work with some of the best minds, such as Dr. Gray and others at MUSC, who know how to deliver healthcare, how to maximize the benefits of healthcare, and also the great landscape that we have at MUSC. We're connecting with people who are in weight management and cardiology and OBGYN. So we've got this wonderful resource of connections that we can work with. At the same time, we've brought in some phenomenal therapists, and we'll keep building in the therapies there at Modern Minds. So it's a collaboration. And right now, actually, the foundation is supporting a lot of the financing here, especially because in the first 4 months of treatment, we call this our immersion phase. The individual pays for their therapy, and we've priced it very much, at the bottom of the market of prices for therapy. But all of the wellness services that we are offering, the mentor, the app, and classes through the week that we're starting to bring up and offer of mindfulness and meditation and yoga and mindful eating and various things, all of those are offered at no cost. So
Wow.
and so at the end of the 4 months, you should have achieved your goals, and we can work on how to keep you connected and doing the things that you found to be healthy and health sustaining for you. And then we have models for what to go forward for those who need more therapy, group treatments and such. So that's a wonderful collaboration of expertise and also a really caring foundation who wants to make a difference in people's mental health.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Gray, talk about options for payment. Dr. Albano mentioned it, the pricing. How can people pay for your services, and do you accept insurance? How does that work?
So as it stands now, part of the downside of being disruptive in the market or being novel and innovative is that it's not something that's recognized by insurance just yet. So part of this is that we wanted to land in a place price-wise where it's not prohibitive for people to come in, recognizing that finances are another of many sources of stress during the pandemic and otherwise. But as we start this innovative model, we're gathering information outcomes to then convince payers, insurers, that this is a model of care that's worth paying for. So the short answer is it's not an insurance option now. However, there are pieces of this that people can file under their own insurance. And our staff can work with people on how to do that. But it's not in a traditional sense where it would be, here's my insurance card and that does it. That said, we've worked really hard to be competitive with the local market in terms of mental health services. Dr. Albano mentioned is that we're competitive, but we also provide a lot of extras built in. And we also, certainly, we don't want to turn people away financially. And so if somebody calls, is interested in care, they can have a discussion in terms of where things are financially, and we can try to work with them on setting a rate that makes sense.
Fantastic. So you really do work very hard on being accessible to the greatest part of the population, greatest possible.
Yes, absolutely. That's a real key piece of this, is that we want to reach the population. We don't want this to be something that people are restricted from purely because of finances.
Right. Thank you. Now, Rebecca, you've been listening in. What has jumped out at you in our discussion today?
Well, I really appreciate that Modern Minds is helping with the financial gap that might be there for somebody needing to become more healthy mentally, and that you're thinking outside the box and how to make it affordable. But I guess the larger question I have is, right now, if you break your arm and you need surgery, you're in the hospital, no questions asked, it's paid for, they admit you. But if you're having mental health issues, there's still a lot of hoops you have to jump through, and it's not covered to the same extent. So do you see that disparity ending anytime soon? I mean, certainly there's more options. It's easier for people to talk about mental wellness, but do you see that? Is there a future where it's going to be covered the same as if I broke my arm and I had to have surgery in the hospital?
That's a really good question. And one of the things that healthcare economists are struggling with every day, and struggling because mental health problems are, I think, Kevin, second or third largest drain on the systems. And also, we know it's one of the main reasons that people can get into huge financial difficulties if they, pay out of pocket, especially for mental health care that is needed, especially for individuals who have very chronic, unrelenting conditions in psychoses or substance abuse, let's say. So we think that it is going to be something that is going to change, because we're at the point where payers and policymakers and lawmakers and such can no longer ignore it. It's there. The other thing I will say is that the stigma of mental health, where waving around a mental health condition could sink a political career or sink a business career, that's not there in the way that it was, thank goodness. We owe a lot to the generation younger than me for being able to admit and own, they've got challenges in various ways, and talking more about it. It's really incumbent on us, I would say, those of us 40 and over, to take stock of weight. It's part of being human. It's no different than having asthma or something. We all have stuff, and sometimes our emotions get the best of us. So we've got to stop stigmatizing this in our generation and allow, people to be who they are and to get access to the help that they need.
One of the huge drains on the system is that if something isn't covered or is complicated to find a way to get it covered or to pay for, it goes downstream and people show up in crisis. And one of the things we're very serious about is working with people when they're feeling stressed and hoping to mitigate what may be a tragic outcome. So the idea is intervening early and having less stigma is if somebody's overwhelmed with stress. Well, that's a human thing. All of us have experienced it. It doesn't mean you're labeled and et cetera, but so that can help prevent the downstream effects that can happen, because depression is a very serious illness, and depression, anxiety, extremely impairing, as Dr. Albano had mentioned. And we want to do our best on the front end, but also people who have struggled with severe symptoms as well. We want to be helpful throughout that spectrum. And part of where the challenge of finding ways to manage is there's such a huge volume of need, but also we're more reactive than proactive as a system. And so oftentimes when people engage in care for the first time, it may be in the emergency room or for hospitalization. And what we're trying to do is help people develop that skill set to prevent that. But recognizing is that these are tough illnesses, but also they tie into the general human condition where we're dealing with varying levels of stress. I think a lot of us during the pandemic have also recognized some of their vulnerabilities they didn't realize otherwise. I've used the comparison thinking about it's something you didn't see when it was high tide and suddenly you have a low tide, all these things you didn't realize were there. Well, changing your day-to-day habits and outside of your own choosing, you recognize these vulnerabilities you didn't have. And I think that in some ways helps to create some empathy for those who have struggled previously. So you sort of get this understanding of it. And my hope is that in another sort of silver lining way helps people to come together and support one another.
Thank you. Great question, Rebecca. Thank you for that. Oh, there's so much more we could talk about. I hope you'll come back and join us again in a little while, and we can talk more about these things in greater detail. But in the meantime, Dr. Albano, how about a final thought on where someone can contact you?
Yes, we're going to put up a slide for you all, but folks can contact us by calling, and of course, I don't have it at my fingertips. Here it is. Can go to modernminds.com and find us there. There will be a slide. Call us. You can reach us through the web, or you could make a phone call to 843-531-9036 and reach us that way.
Wonderful. And Rebecca's got that. She's got that up as well in the chat area. So I appreciate that. How about a final thought, Dr. Albano, about our conversation and about what you're doing and the importance?
What we want folks to realize is that, you know, everyone presents with vulnerabilities and and whether it doesn't take a pandemic to know that there are things that get to us. The pandemic has made it much more evident. And the thing of it is, you're just human. If you're experiencing feelings, you do need help if those feelings take you off track. If you're losing time at work, if you're not engaged in the relationships that you want, if you're finding that you're feeling helpless or hopeless and not enjoying your life, you can be helped and you can make changes yourself. And so we are here to help you do that, do it effectively, and do it in a way that will make you happier and live life with intent.
Thank you, Dr. Albano. Dr. Gray, a final thought?
Sure. Following on Dr. Albano's very timely comments, is we're interested both in helping the people reduce their symptoms of illness, which I think has always been a traditional approach in medicine and in psychiatry and psychology, but it's also actually tipping that further in going into the idea of feeling more well and recognizing this is a full spectrum, and it isn't just illness where you get less ill, and maybe that's the goal, but it's thinking about wellness, that full continuum, and the idea that wellness is not just that you have fewer symptoms of depression or anxiety, but wellness is you're feeling fulfilled, you're achieving some of your life goals, and you're motivated, activated, those sorts of things. And that's really where we are in terms of our ambitions with this program, but just generally speaking. And I don't think it's a naive assertion to say that all of us have the potential to achieve wellness and health and achieve those goals. And what we're really in this for is to help people with that.
Thank you, Dr. Anne Marie Albano, Executive Director of Modern Minds, and Dr. Kevin Gray, Chief Medical Officer at Modern Minds. Thanks to all of our chamber members who take advantage of the information we share here weekly. And you see the slide now with contact information and an online location to get more information. We thank you for joining us at the Pivot, and a big thank you to the Mount Pleasant Chamber's own Rebecca Imholtz for keeping us on track today. From all of us at the Mount Pleasant Chamber of Commerce, thank you for joining us this week at the Pivot. Make it a great week.